Good morning. And to kick off this year's edition of Bay of Bengal Conversation, the first panel is on a post-G20 world, the Global South Rising. And this year, at the G20 Global Summit, Africa Union was added as a permanent member, which now brings the G20 to G21. And the idea was to bring more African voices on the table, and instead of them being recipients of decisions, norms, and rules by countries and institutions that are far advanced. And this also comes at a point where the world is facing and grappling with multiple headwinds, post-pandemic recovery, conflict, and multiple debt crises. The membership of the African Union holds significant importance in a world where Africa plays a central role in discussions regarding climate change, food security, migration,
Christine is here. Okay.
And various other pressing issues. And so today's panel will discuss what this development means for the Global South in a turbulent future. And apologies for the interruption. Welcome, Christine. We are glad to have you with us. So I'll begin by introducing my panel today. Then the session, they will do introductory remarks, then we'll come to the audience for a Q&A session. So to my direct right is Leonardo Neves, a researcher at Getulio Vargas Foundation, Brazil. Next to him is Karori Singh, former director and Emeritus Fellow, South Asia Studies Center, University of Rajasthan, India. Next to Karori is Dr. Christine Fair, a professor of security studies, Georgetown University in the United States. We have Pramod Jaiswal, a research director at the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement in Nepal. And to my extreme right, we have Abdulla Rasheed Ahmed, the Minister of State for Education from the Maldives. And so with that, I think, Mr. Karori, we'll start with you. What does G20, a post-G20 world look like, and with the rising global south? Yes, so you may go.
Yes, good morning, friends and colleagues. I will be briefly presenting my ideas on G20 pathways to new development and security architecture. The last month was of hectic activities of global parlays, beginning from climate summit in Kenya to the UN General Assembly Week in New York, in between the G77 summit and G20 summit, ASEAN summit. All these summits had some common element of multilateralism, the SDGs, then humanitarian considerations. So if we combine all these ideas and the programs charted out by these summits, what type of future we can have. And among them, the G20 is the 21st century organization, which we call more representative and inclusive than other international organizations. The G20 summit is the most important of them all because it's a representative, and India has charted out comprehensive agenda and the New Delhi summit, in which large number of initiatives have been undertaken, which were also supported by the Voice of Global South Summit organized in New Delhi in January. The G20 expressed a strong commitment to strong, sustainable, balanced, inclusive growth, accelerating progress on SDGs, green development, multilateral institutions for 21st century, reinvigorating multilateralism, and so on. It also proposed concrete steps for digital infrastructure, biofuel alliance, One Future Alliance, and most important of them all, India, Middle East, Europe corridor, and Trans-African corridor in the spirit of partnership for global infrastructure initiative undertaken by last year in G7 meeting. And apart from that, India also proposed a 7-year action plan for realization of the G20. All such measures seem very attractive in consonance with principles and purposes of UN Charter and likely to make substantive contribution to the fairer, inclusive, and sustainable world order. However, there are suspicions, apprehensions, and disappointments abound, which can be understood and explained through 3 different dimensions and approaches. The first is geopolitical and strategic dimension. Because every state is pursuing its own geostrategic and political interest, and the global South solidarity seems somewhat elusive when India is aspiring to represent the global South, which was visible in the Voice of Global South, where Brazil and China were absent, they were not represented. Similarly, China is also aspiring to lead the global South, and China played an important role at the G77. So China aspires to lead, India aspires to lead the global South, then Russia is also aspiring to lead the global South. Similarly, Brazil and South Africa, they are also aspiring to lead their regions, Africa and Latin America. Under such a situation, the global South solidarity seems somewhat elusive. The second one is the developmental dimension. Against the popular belief that poverty is being reduced gradually. In fact, the United Nations has revealed that poverty is increasing during last 3-4 years due to various factors, various reasons. And the midway review of SDGs has revealed that only 15% of SDGs are on track. 48% are severely off track, and 37% are somewhat stagnant. So the progress in regard to SDGs is really disappointing. Then the poverty is increasing to the extent during 2020 to 23, 165 million people fell into poverty as claimed by UNDP. So the poverty is increasing. And contrarily to addressing the poverty, the military expenditure is continuously increasing during last 8 years. It has reached 2.2 trillion, and US is the greatest spending largest amount on military expenditure. That comes around 39% of the total military expenditure. So the realization of SDGs seems most unlikely in near future. The third dimension is the humanitarian dimension, that global North shall have to pay for the development of the global South, since global North is the beneficiary of colonialism in the past. All 3 approaches are not exclusive, and they are intertwined, and when they are intertwined, it creates more confusion and then clarity. Then what we can infer from all these 3 approaches in the coming years? The first is the poverty is continuously increasing against the popular belief of gradual poverty eradication during last a few years, despite the concrete efforts of its eradication. The poverty disables people to exercise their rights and undermines human dignity. It might have been partly because of the inadequate understanding of the poverty situation, improper policies, and lack of sound strategies. The second inference which we can draw is there is a need of convergence between neoliberal tenets of unhindered growth and entrepreneurial freedom with welfareist measures of equality and justice at the ideological level. It seems a queer mixture of diverse ideas, but given the present-day challenges of wide disparities and imbalanced growth, it seems more relevant. Hence, technology-driven growth and development must be more human-centric. The third inference which we can draw is there must be immediate reprioritization of global needs and requirements through multilateral meetings of different groupings, both regional and international, and acts of individual nations. The G20 being more inclusive 21st century organization, immune of Cold War legacy, must initiate collaborative efforts with other organizations and United Nations for new effective sustainable global development architecture. The efforts and acts which have been initiated and pronounced are just piecemeal solutions of global developmental problems and challenges. The fourth one is the great powers of Global South must exhibit solidarity of their multilateral organizations instead of aspiring for their individual leadership of Global South. Aspiration for individual leadership will jeopardize collective strength and substantive interest of the Global South. Herein, the term referred in BRICS Johannesburg Declaration, cooperation on competition. Though these countries are competing for the leadership, but there can be cooperation on competition. The term was referred in case of market and economic situation, but that should also be in case of geopolitical and strategic aspect as well. So the Global South countries must have faith in cooperation on competition. The last one is Global North is beneficiary of the slavery and subsequently colonialism. The Global South has immensely contributed to the advancement of the Global North, the developed North. Hence, it is payback time for them to Global South in terms of international development cooperation. At the same intensity through which resources have been mobilized for militarization in recent years. These measures may ensure inclusive and sustainable world order by mending the fractures and fragmentation under the aegis of United Nations, which must be enriched and empowered in view of the needs and requirements of the 21st century global reality, oft repeated by the UN Secretary General. So at the end, I would like to conclude that the Global South countries must rededicate their efforts for the Global South solidarity and negotiate with the developed North, and through which there must be efforts to bridge the East-West polarity and North-South divide, and that can be the viable option in the near future. And here, I don't think the UN alone can do something. As UN Secretary General quite often repeated that it is unrealistic, or rather it is a fantasy that UN alone can do something. So there must be some kind of collaborative efforts with United Nations, regional and the global organizations to overcome the challenges of the global community, the common security and development architecture, and that then the mission of global governance studies will be realized, it will be the reality. With these words, I would like to thank each and everyone, and then I am ready to answer the question if there will be some questions. Thank you.
So thank you, sir. The UN Secretary General mentioned categorically that fragmentation is inevitable unless we strengthen our multilateral frameworks. And multilateral institutions will only survive if they are truly universal. And in line with this, Leonardo, build on that thought.
Well, first of all, good morning to all of you, and thank you for the CGS in the person office of friends Zilu for the invitation. As I was updating my reading to come here and talk to you, one concept popped up almost every time that I was reading something or watching this debate on a video. It was the idea of global transition. And I think it's interesting because we have been speaking about global transition for like 30, 40 years right now. But the interesting thing is that most of us do not use the same time frame. Most of us place the global transition in different landmarks, different beginnings. So I think it's interesting because I can think about, at least in the last several decades, several small world orders. Of course, Cold War, the most famous one, the most easy one to see. There is, of course, the unipolar moments, or perhaps the end of the history, as Fukuyama said, which oddly enough just endured like 10 years. Then we have the multipolar worlds, the emergency of emerging countries, which also do not last too long. I mean, after that, we have several crises. And for that, I have the figure, the image in my mind of Brazil, of course, in the sense that in the cover of the Economist magazine, we saw the Christ the Redeemer, the statue taking off, showing how emerging countries were taking off. And then 4 years later, we saw on the cover of the magazine, the Christ the Redeemer crashing, land crashing, showing how some developing countries were, of course, developing several struggles with crisis. Then we had what I'm calling the resurgence of the West. Somehow US bounced after the 2008 financial crisis, and then we had the Europe somehow bouncing after the 2010, 2014 crisis, economic crisis, and of course we have at the same time the clear rise of China. And after that, right now, we have what we are discussing somehow in the subject here. We have the war in Ukraine. Somehow, the war that Russia is implicated in Ukraine is creating a new momentum, or perhaps creating a new divide in which we are facing a new world order. And that's what we're discussing here, what we are going to face in the near future in terms of new world order. So, while I was this evening, struggling with my jet lag, I decided to consult the experts, and I asked ChatGPT what would be the face of this new world order. And the AI told me at least, that the new world order will have 6 features. I have them here. The first of it here is that we're going to face some multipolar worlds. Again, US, China, European Union, and other groupings would be protagonists in this new world order, let's say. Continue US dominance, no news here, despite the fact that the relative decline of US will still be the dominant power in the foreseeable future. Rise of China, of course, again, China will not collapse soon at least, so it will keep rising from the foreseeable future. Again, not very fancy, increase our influence of regional powers within the regions, of course. So regional powers like Brazil, South Africa, and other countries, as my colleague just said, will be increasing their role within the regions. Oddly enough, they are saying also the multilateralism, the global governance, will receive a push in the coming years, despite what we heard today, because global challenges would demand global response, and then multilateral response would be in demands. That's the AI thinking. I think it's interesting. And last but not least, I think the most interesting one that the ChatGPT answer that ChatGPT gave me is that technology will most probably reshape world order in the near future. And that's one I think we deserve a little consideration. But despite of all of that I heard about ChatGPT here, I think the lack of sophistication, some of them, we knew that already. So I decided to somehow give some human perspective in this idea, and I think that I can give to you, of course, 3 major movements, major trends, perhaps that the war in Ukraine has implicated, catalyzed, enhanced somehow. The first one, it's pretty clear. It's the West separation from Russia. The West will separate from Russia almost completely, not completely, but almost completely. The EU will get the energy independence from Russia. They will isolate Russia as much as they can in the sense of global value chains, their value chains, in the sense of their access to their technology. And it will be difficult, at least while Putin is here around, from Russia to be back to the fold with the European Union. So, and then I think it's important. I think that we're discounting the long-term results of the isolation of Russia in 10, 15 years' time, how it will impact in Russia's developments and how it impacts in how Russia will see itself in the world, how Russia will perhaps try to play a role in the world. The second major movement, again, not news, but I think it's important to mention, is the distancing between US and China. That's the most important relation nowadays, and they are distanced themselves, and the Russian war will probably enhance, in a bad way, this distancing. Which is interesting, because in the last couple of decades, the pragmatism of the relationship between US and China made both countries profit a lot from one another. But this distress between them right now is not only distancing themselves, but they are creating their own groupings, they're creating their own narrative, they're creating their own networks, and that should divide much more all of us. The third, and perhaps the most important things that we can discuss here regarding the war in Ukraine is the decoupling of the West and the global South. And that's important for us, because developing countries somehow, we are decoupling from the West for quite some time, and I think the war in Ukraine is stressing that point. Several ideas here. One of them, of course, is how the West is demanding for some countries to take position. And again, I'm not defending or taking sides about Russia and the West in the war, and that's not, it's beside the points here, but it's how they are demanding for us to take sides. Again, we saw the same thing when when US demand for some of us to take sides in staying away from Chinese technology in the 5G discussions. The COVID-19 was again something that was very revealing, in the sense how the West aided developing countries in having access to vaccine, or at least after then have been vaccinated, and how they help countries to relieve that debt stress because of the impacts of the COVID. So, and I think it's more important that we see how the West is also struggling with us in creating a pandemic treaty right now, even though we have like 2 years from the pandemic. So I think that there are some things that are putting a stress between the relationship between the West and the global South. Climate change, for me, is the critical issue here and the more clear one. I do not think that the 100 billion pledge made in Paris will be fulfilled. I do not think that most of the political solutions that are coming from the West will generate many benefits in the global South. Of course, because they are facing the same challenge that we are at this moment. And of course, they will funnel their funds, funnel their efforts to their own countries. But the thing is, we developing countries, at least the least developing countries, they are the ones that least contributed to the climate change. They will face the biggest impacts of the stress in extreme weather events, and they have the least resources to couple of that. So the thing is, how can we think about the global order in the sense of these 3 major movements? I think that we are going to see more fragmentation, in the sense that we are going to see, I believe so, many different groupings. And in the sense that those groupings will work in many different world orders. In the sense that we are going to see in the future a security world order, an economic world order. And of course, some other differences like the climate, digital, and other spheres when we have different leadership, different frameworks, and different ways in deal with these subjects, these global challenges. And I think it's important for the Global South, because that's here that not only the G20, the 12 developing countries within the G20, but the regional powers, and Bangladesh is definitely one of them, will have something to do, will have something to say. That's why we are thinking about in Brazil right now, the Vargas Foundation, my foundation, within the umbrella, with the framework of the G20 next year, which Brazil will hold the presidency, we are thinking about initiatives that speaks to those countries. One idea that we are trying to develop right now is the idea of the Beyond G20. We are trying to engage next year several countries, several actors indeed. There's some that should have something to say, that should have something to contribute to this new world order in whatever is the theme. So that's the message that perhaps I have to you today. Different countries, regional powers, you have to step up, find your partners, find the zones that you feel comfortable that you can contribute, there's something to say, and have your voice heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonard. Next, we'll hear from Pramod, and building on the thoughts on how can Global South countries cooperate, going forward.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Chair. At the outset, let me thank Jillur for the great achievement of putting BoC together. It's the second episode that I've attended, and I'm really impressed with the event in terms of quality, quantity, and the quality of debate that has been going through. It's also a privilege for us to participate along with the distinguished scholars, experts, diplomats around the world with whom we have been engaging a couple of times. Let me start with what the previous speaker in the morning talked about, like the Indo-Pacific outlook that Bangladesh has come on. We at NICE also working on similar pattern, Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, the institute that we head, we have been working on the similar pattern, what should be Nepal's outlook to Indo-Pacific strategy. And the reason behind is that we can see the world coming together in Asia, that major powers coming together in Asia for their influence, and that is the opportunity for us to engage. So let me start with the Global South. We all know that there has been a political and economic rise of Global South, and with the rise of Global South, with the rise of China, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or even Bangladesh, Indonesia in recent times, there's also rise of there's also rise of South Asia. So Global South and South Asia has been rising simultaneously, and this has indicated that the world might probably move from unipolar to a multipolar world. And these changes will also have a change on global politics in days to come. The world cannot take any decisions without the support of Global South or South Asia in coming days, which is the clear predictions. But the much also depends on the Global South, how the countries in Global South are going to engage or position themselves in the great power rivalry that is going to emerge. If you look at South Asia, it will be a bigger challenge. India, China, and US, how they're going to compete in the region and how they're going to engage in South Asia will have severe implications. The complex competition or the intense competition of China and India is going to get Global South on their sides. As the previous speaker said that Russia is working on with the Global South, China is there, India, and several other powers are engaging Global South, and that provide a number of challenges and opportunities for countries in the region. We all know that China's through its BRI and different other new initiatives like GDI, GSI, or GCI has been expanding its influence. Similarly, on the other side, we have Indo-Pacific strategy, US leading. These two initiatives are going to define the fate of not only South Asia and Global South, but the whole world. As I come from Nepal, let me put how it is going to impact the region and my country. First, the question arises that Nepal, that is landlocked, which lies between India and China, does it have a concern on Indo-Pacific region, or is it a maritime concern for that? Is Nepal a maritime country, or security concerns are important for Nepal? We say yes. Nepal has open border with India. India is a maritime power. So Nepal is a virtual maritime power. Nepal is a country which has concerns on maritime issues. So we call Nepal as a virtual maritime security power. Second, with the introduction of BIMSTEC, Nepal has access to Bay of Bengal region, and that poses severe concerns for Nepal. Third, what we have seen is that there is intense competition between Indo-Pacific waters and the Himalayas. When India started to challenge China in the Indo-Pacific water, that when India started to indicate to the Chinese that you come to Indian Ocean, the Pacific region, and I'll challenge you both politically and economically. The Chinese said, okay, I'll challenge you the Himalayas, which have immediate strategic interest. And then there are a number of incidents like Doklam, Ladakh, Pangong, and series of activities along the Himalayan region started to emerge. So tomorrow, the competition of Indo-Pacific region will be seen on the Himalayas, and that is where Nepal and the other countries has to be prepared for. Now, this is where our project, which we are working on, is Nepal's outlook to Indo-Pacific comes into picture. What should be Nepal's outlook? I think when Americans have their Indo-Pacific strategy, when Bangladesh has come, where Japanese have their own understanding, where Indians have their, based on their interest, I think Nepal should also clearly define what are their Indo-Pacific strategy, what are their needs and concern, and how they would like to engage with the world. This will not only give a clear signal to our neighbors, India and China, it will also refrain Nepal from getting into the geopolitical rivalry that can impact the security, economic interests of Nepal. Now, as the previous speaker said, that where can the countries of South Asia come? I think the one is solidarity. There is a need for solidarity in global South as well as in South Asia. We should engage through bilateral or multilateral engagements. Coming back to Bangladesh, I think Nepal and Bangladesh are doing together in recent times. If you look at last 5 years, there's deeper engagement between Nepal and Bangladesh on energy and connectivity. When Nepal was unilaterally engaging with India and asking for connectivity or access to Bangladesh market, it was not working. Same was done by Bangladesh. But when Bangladesh and Nepal came together and started negotiating with India, things has progressed further. Now Nepal and Bangladesh are going to work on trade, on connectivity as well as on energy trade. And that is where the similar pattern has to come when it comes to Global South. Another is that we also see that there is immense opportunities and number of areas where the countries of Global South can collaborate. One is global governance, or you can say environment, climate change and clean energy, poverty, economic development. There are a number of areas where the countries can come together. Coming back to Judith, like what can be the initiative, how can they come together? I think first, if we do not create multilateral or bilateral engagements, or through, if we are not able to achieve through those engagements, at least we can put them together through different initiatives, regional organizations that we have like SAARC, BIMSTEC and all, or even go through unilateral engagements and work on those programs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pramod. We can hear from you, Mr. Rasheed. Sorry?
Sorry, I could not get it.
We can hear from Mr. Abdulla Rasheed.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Chairman of CGS and other excellencies, my fellow members, moderator, and everyone present here, Assalamu alaikum and very good morning to you all. Before me, my fellow panel members have shared a lot of valuable ideas how Global South can further develop. I can see audience sitting very passive. Myself, as a teacher, would like to tell you a joke before I proceed. Before that, let me introduce myself. I started my career as a teacher, then I was a school supervisor, and then I was a principal in the government school in the Maldives. After that, I was working as a vice rector, and currently I am Minister of State for Education, Maldives, in the current government. As you know, a new government will take office from 17th November. Okay, as I said, a joke from an English teacher. English teacher wants students to enrich the vocabulary. So the teacher was explaining how students can memorize or enrich the vocabulary. So she told the students, if you repeatedly say it 10 times, it will be yours forever. Once again, the technique is, if you repeatedly say it 10 times, it will be yours forever. Then during the break time, one boy sitting at the back of the classroom, murmuring, slowly saying that Amanda, Amanda, Amanda. Who is Amanda? Amanda is Hollywood actress. So this boy thought, before I go home, I will own Amanda. Because English teacher told that if you repeatedly say it 10 times, it will be yours forever. So this boy thought, okay, today before I go home, I will own Amanda. So that is one joke. Again, before that, one more. Again, English teacher. Ask the students to write a descriptive writing, and the topic given was describe a cricket match. So everyone was writing and writing and writing except one boy. This boy was doing nothing. Finally, the teacher got angry and said, hey, why you are not doing anything? Then he said, I have done my work. Then teacher knows that he didn't do anything. But then teacher took the book and saw only one sentence. Because of the heavy rain, cricket match cancelled. So that's all. Let me start. First question is why there is a huge gap between global south and global north. I think that's the question we need to ask. We all know that global north is considered more developed. They have more resources, and the global south needs to do better. The question is, what are the things, or do we have the potential equally perform in all the areas, competing or minimizing the gap between global north and global south? I can say yes, there are things that global south could do. There are a number of things. One thing I can highlight is to have more strategic development. Strategically, we should develop the countries individually as well as collectively. Global South countries, in terms of number of the countries, it is more. In terms of population, it is more. The land area is more. Therefore, we can see a lot of potential if it is really utilized in a strategic manner. It has the potential. And another thing is political stability. Definitely, political stability is very important, and strengthening the democracy for the development of global south. And another thing, we can see that global north countries, they have transformed their economy from production-based to knowledge-based. Therefore, global south also should do the same. In 21st century, knowledge economy should be the buzz term we used. If we are still using traditional methods of processing or governing the economy, we should be lagging behind. Therefore, knowledge economy should be something we should promote in our countries. In order to promote knowledge economy, we should give focus providing quality education. It is the quality education which makes the difference a country. We can see very small countries with small population, with small area. They are far developed than much bigger countries. What's the difference? What's the secret behind? We can see very skillful, very educated population where technology is used much more. Therefore, that's something we also should do to provide quality education. Invest in human capital is another important thing. When we invest, when we make our human resource really valuable, who are capable to perform in 20th century workforce, definitely our countries will be developing day by day. When we talk about investing human capital, I can say that it is very important to invest on technical and vocational education. Unfortunately, most of the countries still believe that it is the academic, the pure knowledge which is important. But the fact is, technical and vocational education is much more important for the development of 21st century. Even one of the panelists talk about importance of sustainable development goals. As we all know, the world leaders have agreed to achieve sustainable development goals when world reach 2030. Now we are in the halfway. The question is how much we have achieved. We know that most of the countries are far behind. If we really achieve sustainable development goals, I can say that most of the existing problems will be solved. Therefore, I think it is high time to think about how to achieve sustainable development goals. Another important factor which is really important is promoting creativity and innovation among our countries. We know that it is the most innovative companies which are the richest, most innovative individuals, they are more successful. In developed countries, according to research, they invest their time on creating knowledge, utilizing knowledge, spending time on creativity and innovation. But less developed countries still, most of the time is invest on doing routine things, either done by the machine or done by the human. Therefore, promoting creativity and innovation is most important. To conclude, I just want to say that we have to think globally, but we have to act locally. Then together, we all can develop. I wish you all the best. Have a good day. Thank you for inviting me. I wish you all the best once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And over to you, Christine.
I'm not going to go to the podium. So this is kind of awkward. I'm not sure how I got on this panel because this is way out of my wheelhouse. But there is one thing that I think is kind of relevant, and I've been paying attention to it quite a bit over the last few weeks. And this is I think, a testament to a rising India, and that is the standoff with Canada. So I'm really sorry if there are any Canadians in the room. Jaiswal is kind of giving Trudeau a trouncing. But what's actually kind of interesting about it is that this standoff, I mean, y'all know what happened, right? Justin Trudeau announced to Parliament that they had signals intelligence that Indian intelligence basically knocked off this Khalistani activist named Najjar. They then ousted the raw chief from the country, and then within hours, India responded and reciprocated. And India, of course, rubbished these claims that it had knocked off Niger, but the United States very sheepishly released that, in fact, the United States had given to Canada Five Eyes information. And so this is where this standoff kind of begins. And when I think about it, the first thing is, you know, India really sees itself as a rising power. And partly this is Modi, right? Modi pretty much rejects everything that Nehru laid out for India in terms of its priorities and the way in which India was going to handle its foreign affairs. So part of Modi, you know, he likes to be called the guy with the 56-inch chest, although he might want to update that to the 58-inch pouch. But nonetheless, he likes to represent to his followers that he is a different kind of Indian leader, that he is going to, quote unquote, you know, stick it to the white guy. And so this particular assassination isn't the only peculiar assassination of Khalistanis that happened in roughly the same time period. Another Khalistani leader was killed in Pakistan, and then another died under mysterious circumstances in, Birmingham. And his family doesn't necessarily buy the official line for his death. So at the crux of this is really a clash of values as India is rising. And it's also a really cold assessment that India has made that the United States and European powers are not going to seek to punish India for this, because India really understands that it can rely upon its strategic status in the aspirations of having India help us manage the rise of China. So for me, it's kind of funny, because for many years, Indians would howl in outrage that Pakistan got away with flouting norms because of its strategic significance. Well, guess what? India is also benefiting from this strategic significance and getting to allegedly flout norms. I want to say for the record that, you know, I'm simply articulating how this has been represented. As an American citizen, right, we had Osama bin Laden whacked. Israel whacks people all the time, and of course the United States at the UN Security Council gives Israel cover, and then of course we know that Russia and North Korea and others have assassinated folks abroad. So it's a really strange club to be a part of. But what really kind of drove this standoff, there's domestic concerns and there's foreign policy concerns. And that is that Canada, but I will also say the United States and the United Kingdom as well, we have not been very receptive to India's concerns about Khalistani activism. And part of the problem is that for the vast majority of Khalistani activists, they are simply exploiting their protected speech. Right? So as long as they're not engaging in violence or inciting violence, whether India likes it or not, it's protected speech to say you support a Khalistan, right? Now, that's all fine and good, but if you actually pay attention to the groups that are supporting Khalistan, and particularly if you know Punjabi, as I do, what you'll actually see is that the groups will, I will say, 95% of the time will engage in speech that's protected, but in the other 5% of the time, they are engaging in speech acts which are incredibly incendiary and possibly incitement. They somehow avoid incitement because sometimes they'll put this really, really small print. Like, for example, I had one piece that I'd collected where Six for Justice had asked for a bounty for Lieutenant General Brar, retired, because he was responsible for Operation Blue Star. And then this is the big writing, right? And then the little itty bitty writing, it says, for information for his whereabouts, right? But, you know, you have to look really hard to see that disclosure. So from India's point of view, because India has a number of colonial era laws that allow them to criminalize speech, and they're usually used selectively. Like the Modi government is using these laws selectively to silence its critics. I'm sure Congress did it too. But it's kind of incomprehensible for many Indians that you could have people calling and openly demanding what India sees as the breakup of India. So part of this is really a clash of understanding of what civil liberties are. But that argument only goes so far, because India is right to point out that Justin Trudeau, even while he was offering his support to the farmers' movement, he was actually being very brutal in trying to break up the truckers' movement in Canada. Another interesting thing that sort of, I think, weakens Trudeau's argument is that this guy, Najjar, he actually had 2 red corner notices against him, one in 2014 and one in 2016. And Canada, of course, did not oblige and extradite him, but it did put him on the no-fly list for about 1 year, right? So this is sort of low-hanging fruit for a rising India to take on. So if you're following Indian Twitter, it's sort of like, well, you don't have any proof that we did it, and if we did do it, so what? Because everyone else does it, right? And this is what rising powers do. In fact, one of the headlines that I saw about this in one of India's newspapers was, RAW is now able to conduct Mossad-style assassinations, right? So the way this is playing domestically is very much, I think, to Modi's favor. But so let's sort of unpack this domestically, right? So this is also a double win for Modi. Not only is he taking on Canada, and by all accounts he's winning, because no matter what happens with the intelligence either is not, first of all, it's very unlikely that intelligence is going to be shown, right? Because intelligence compromises sources and national technical means. So the likelihood of this ever being revealed to India is incredibly low. But let's just pretend that I'm the evidence fairy, and there's evidence that supports that India did it. India says, so what? Right? We're arousing power. In fact, what I love, India is actually labeling Canada the next Pakistan. Right? This is an incredibly important talking point. And of course, the argument and the parallel that India is making is that in the same way Pakistan harbors terrorists and doesn't do anything about it, so is Canada, right? So that is playing really, really well with his domestic audience. But it also has like this sort of double-edged sword, which Modi is wielding to his advantage. Because if you look at how the United States has reacted to this standoff between India and Canada, after this initial statement that we had given them this Five Eyes intelligence, I think Tony Blinken had some pretty milquetoast comment upon it. Biden at one point said that there needs to be accountability, and then complete silence. Like Justin Trudeau has just been all by himself. And India has correctly assessed that no one is really going to risk their relationship with India because they may or may not have whacked 1 or possibly 3 Khalistani terrorists, because India understands that it is strategically important in managing this Chinese threat. And it kind of reminds me of the calculus that the BJP-led coalition made in 1998 when it conducted its nuclear test, right? It correctly assessed that the world is going to be pretty annoyed that it actually has to sanction India, and that these sanctions would be short-lived. And so it's a very similar kind of calculus. So not only does this standoff with Canada sort of, if you will, there's this, I spend too much time in the Punjab. So the Punjabis have this great expression, it makes his mooch bigger, agar mooch nahi to kuch nahi. So it, quote, is making Modi's mooch grow. So, but it also has this fascinating domestic benefit for Modi as well, because the community that's primarily screwed by this are the Punjabis, and particularly the Sikhs in the Punjab. And that particular community has really felt alienated and even targeted by the BJP, going back to the farmers' protest when a couple of miscreants allowed the government to tar the whole thing as a Khalistani enterprise. And then, of course, there was this Amrit Paul mysterious drama. He pops out of nowhere, he's dressed as Bhindranwala, he's allowed to say outrageous things, and no one in Indian politics just sort of fall from nowhere. So the gossip and the langar was that he had to be an agency man. And then, of course, when he kind of got out of hand, he disappeared. He's off in a prison in Assam. If you look at the most recent move that India made with respect to Canada, Modi says that he basically kicked out some 41 additional diplomats. The official statement says, well, that we should have parity in the sizes of our diplomatic mission, right? Which at first blush, this seems like a reasonable thing, except the visa traffic is not equal in both directions. There are a lot more visas being processed by Canada in Chandigarh and in Delhi than in Ottawa for the reverse. So it's wedding season in the Punjab, right? So a lot of Canadians would ordinarily be coming back this time to attend weddings or to have their children married. Well, they can't get visas. So the economic impact of this affecting the Punjab is absolutely huge, right? Marriage halls are having to endure cancellations. All of the downstream revenue associated with the marriage industry are also in jeopardy. And perhaps most importantly, if you've ever spent any time in the Punjab and you ask a young person, a young man in particular, what is it that you want to do with your life? He says, I want to go to Canada. Like, that's it. That's their plan. It's almost like I'm going to win the lottery. And there's an entire industry of what I would say scam education that will allow Punjabis to get to Canada. And the amount of money that it takes to basically do all the gitchy that's needed to get a seat in a Canadian institution, get the visa, they're basically mortgaging off they're selling off their lands, and that can't be undone. So you have a whole set of Sikhs right now who have sold off their ancestral land. They're in hock. You can't get refunds on bribes paid, right? And they're in limbo because they're not certain when or if they're going to be able to go to Canada. So for me, this is a really interesting case study. Yeah, I'm actually finishing up right now. Did you do that for the other speakers? You actually didn't. So I'm going to call the bullshit flag on that. That's just not cool, dude. You didn't do it for anyone else, and I'm finishing up. Totally random. Could it be that I'm the only female apart from her on the panel? I don't know. You know what? You didn't do it to anyone else. I'm calling you out on it. All you can do is say, hey, I'm sorry. That's all you need to do. I don't put up with dudes taking pungas with me. I give pungas right back, bro. So from my point of view, this is a really interesting case study, right, of what a rising India is going to look like, taking opportunities with countries like Canada to sort of flex. And if it has the added benefit of domestic politics working in the current regime's favor, then that's all the best, or that works out in every direction for the current government. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. And with just about 17 minutes to spare, we'll give the audience a chance to ask their question. You'll tell us your names, where you're from, and who you direct your question to. We'll do 4 to 5 questions. Question number 1, 2 right there, 3 here, 4 there, and 5. Thank you, in that order. Sorry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Aminul Karim. I'm from Bangladesh, and I'm a retired soldier. Yeah. My question is directed to Professor Singh, the first speaker of this panel. So you talked about the G20. My question is, how to define G20? As I understand, the international organizations, they can be either alliance, they can be alignment, or they can be in alignment mode, or they can be in tentative mode. That's what I know, actually, 3 of them. Now, G20, is it a concrete organization you talk about? And then you have diverse sort of actors here, like China, India, Russia. Russia has turned out to be a junior partner of China, actually. Brazil, USA, UK, and so on and so forth. It's very diverse. So how do you really define this? It's not an alliance, no way. Then how do you really define that? And I'm talking about India itself. I was just listening to your former finance minister, Mr. Chidandaram. He was asked a question that India is very strong economically, because GDP size is now about $3.8 trillion. But Chidandaram asked him the counter question, what is the per capita income of India? It is even less than Bangladesh. He says, unless it reaches 12,000 US dollar, you can't call it a robust economy. So that shows the fragility or weakness of Indian economy. Sir, your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take all the questions first. The microphone is behind there. We had question number 2. Please go to the microphone.
My question is for Leonardo, if I can call you Leonardo. The 3 points that you made, I think are absolutely brilliant points. The separation between isolation of Russia from the Western world, separation between China and US, and the third, the global South versus the US. Now, in light of your analysis, which I find very, very convincing, how do you look at like these are 3 separate alliances or separate problems, right? Now, in each of these, we find overlapping relationship, right? I mean, all these organizations, all these groupings like G20, BRICS, Mercosur, ASEAN, whatever you think of, you have overlapping membership, right?
Kindly summarize your question, please.
The second point is that most recently, a Norwegian diplomat wrote in Foreign Affairs that no matter how many times we use multipolar world, the world is bipolar. Bipolar in terms of US and China. How do you react to that? How do you deal with this new bipolarism? If you look at gross domestic product, you look at military spending, you look at size of economy, in all indicators, the world is bipolar, according to this diplomat. How do you react to that? How does that work with your 3-pronged problems that you have identified? Thank you.
Starting with you.
I would like to respond in a pointed way. Your question was how to define the G20. G20 is neither a part of United Nations nor an alliance. It's without headquarters. It's just a voluntary organization. Its decisions are not mandatory for any country. And about your second question, India is very low in per capita income, even among the G20 countries. I agree with you, but I don't want to dwell details about the political leaders. What political leaders are saying, sometimes they are euphoric, but still India is asserting its soft power, and India has human resource potentials in IT sector, or maybe in future artificial intelligence. So from that point of view, India has some potentials. Otherwise, in terms of per capita income, India is the lowest among the G20 countries. And then question was about the isolation of Russia, China, and bipolar world. If we talk of the bipolar world, it's a nightmarish situation for the global community. I don't think the bipolar world will emerge. If bipolar world emerges, it will be the worse than the Cold War situation, and whole existence of the whole planet will be at stake. So I don't think it is emerging a bipolar world, and even the Western world, led by United States, I think US is not asserting its unipolarity or hegemony, but US is emphasizing multipolarity. But multipolarity does not mean multiple hegemonies in the global south or in the global world. So the bipolarity, even the Western world is not accepting, US is not ready. US policy is just to de-risk China, not to decouple China. So their effort is to de-risk the challenges they are having, not decoupling. So it's a nightmarish situation if we talk of the bipolar world. Then the Russia, China, because every country is pursuing its own interest through the geopolitical and strategic measures. Every state is trying to undermine the another state, which is posing the changes. In international relations, we have a neorealist theory, which says that every country is defensive positional. If China is attempting to displace United States from its position, so definitely US will assert its position of dominance. So if US is defensive positional, it's not unusual in international relations, but I think US and China will stand together. China is economically advancing, and China is fulfilling consumer needs of almost all the countries around the world. So we cannot undermine China. So together, I think in convergence, we can do something meaningful. And here, I hope the global community will stand together for the sake of humanity and posterity. This is the only response. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you for that question from Australia. So I really agree with you. In fact, I wrote a really lengthy piece for Lawfare about this. You know, in some sense, India is calling the global north bluff, right? If you can assassinate Osama bin Laden, if Israel can assassinate whoever it wants to assassinate, why are our security threats less important than yours, right? So I think this is why this case study is so interesting to me. So the other issue, you know, I didn't talk about it that much in the presentation because it's quite detailed, but there are genuine differences about what's accepted as evidence. So for example, India's investigations are notoriously problematic, particularly when it comes to the Punjab. And those first information reports actually went into the red corner notice, right? So my argument is, even if you don't like the nasty police process through which these red corner notices arose, we just can't dismiss it, right? We have our own national technical means to investigate whether or not an individual is potentially guilty of what India alleges, right? So I think this is a really fascinating test point where India is saying, how can our security concerns be less important than yours? So in this sense, I really applaud India for standing up, because personally I'm not a huge fan of extrajudicial killings, including that of Osama bin Laden. But the other issue that was raised by the person that came after you was, is India actually going to be a competent partner in managing the rise of China? So in my view, the answer is no. And I've been saying this now for quite a number of, well, I guess about 20 years. India has not proven that it is capable of executing the kinds of defense reforms that are necessary. It's a bureaucratic problem as much as anything else. I think my colleague Ahmed Mukherjee in his book, Absent Dialogue, really lays out why people will keep saying India is rising. I mean, I literally, when I teach this class at
We are out of
Georgetown.
time, Christine.
Yeah, I'm cool. I'm going to finish this. When I teach this class at Georgetown, I literally have like 20 years of book covers that say India is rising, and yet it actually hasn't risen. But India, within the DC decision-making process, we have this liability of newness. We actually don't have South Asia cadre who stay in the South Asia portfolio. So as soon as they clue up and they figure out the limits of this relationship, they move on to something else. So there'll be this perpetual sense that India is going to be able to do this, but those of us who have been following it for quite a bit, including Ashley Tellis, by the way, even Ashley Tellis has soured on the likelihood that India is going to be capable of doing what we had hoped it would do in the first instance.
Thank you. And special thanks to my esteemed panel for all your voices and your articulation of issues on the rise of the Global South. And thanks to the Bay of Bengal organizers, the Center for Governance Studies, the Executive Director, the Chairman, and the entire team. And to our patient and esteemed audience, thank you for being with us for this session. My name is Judith Mwaniki. I am from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you.